Ambassador Qrell'tix nervously adjusted his ceremonial collar for the 47th time that morning. The thin membranes of his 4 nostrils fluttered with anxiety as he scanned the grand chamber of the Galactic Unity Council. Today was supposed to be routine, boring even, just how he liked it. "Would you please stop fidgeting?" hissed Senior Ambassador Qrell'tix from beside him. "Your constant movement disrupts the harmony of the proceedings." Sorry, Qrell'tix whispered, forcing his 6-fingered hands to remain still on the polished conference table. "Pre-meeting jitters. You know how it is." "I most certainly do not," Qrell'tix replied with a sniff that made her antenna quiver disapprovingly. Qrell'tix sighed. The Grand Chamber of Galactic Unity was impressively dull, just as it had been for the past 12,000 cycles. Representatives from over 300 species sat arranged in perfect concentric circles, and each at their designated stations according to the exact date of their admission to the Council. The architecture was designed to induce a sense of serene bureaucratic order, soft blue lighting, climate-controlled to accommodate the median comfort level of all species present, and acoustic dampeners that ensured even the loudest argument sounded like polite disagreement. Grand Chancellor Zumbala floated at the center podium, his gelatinous form pulsing with the gravitas of his office. His voice, artificially amplified, droned through the chamber. "And as we approach Agenda Item 27, Subsection 9, Paragraph 4, we must consider the petition of the newly discovered sentient species from the backwater planet designated as Sol 3. The preliminary reports suggest they call themselves humans and have achieved primitive faster than light travel through entirely unsafe methods that violate at least 16 Council safety regulations." Qrell'tix perked up slightly. This was actually the one agenda item he'd been looking forward to. New species were rare these days, with most of the galaxy's intelligent life having been catalogued centuries ago. His department would be responsible for the initial cultural exchange program if the humans were granted probationary member status. The Committee on New Species Integration has prepared a 300-page report on the appropriate integration timeline, continued Zumbala, his speech tendrils waving languidly, "which we will now review, paragraph by paragraph, beginning with the executive summary of the introduction to the preface." A loud bang echoed through the chamber, causing Qrell'tix to nearly jump out of his exoskeleton. The sacred doors at the main entrance, which were supposed to open with silent dignity, had been thrown open with such force that one actually cracked. "Oh, for crying out loud, Penny. Did you have to kick it that hard?" came a gruff voice that hurt Qrell'tix's auditory receptors with its harsh consonants. "Sorry, Mack. I didn't realize they'd be so flimsy." "You'd think an advanced alien council would have better doors," replied a second voice, slightly higher pitched but equally grating. Qrell'tix's circulatory fluids ran cold as 2 bipedal figures strode into the chamber with a confidence that bordered on sacrilege. It was impossible. The station's security systems were the best in the galaxy. No unauthorized visitors had ever breached the council chamber in its entire history. Yet here they were, 2 humans, walking into the most secure location in the galaxy like they were strolling into a public refreshment dispensary. Zumbala's gelatinous form rippled with shock. Security breach. How did these creatures bypass our defenses? The taller human shrugged. "Your defense AI needed a reboot. He helped it along. Now, about this meeting we weren't invited to." Qrell'tix knew, with the certainty of someone witnessing a historic disaster in progress, that this was going to be the Council's worst day in recorded history. And somehow, he was going to end up responsible for it. The silence that fell over the council chamber was so complete that Qrell'tix could hear the soft squelching of Chancellor Zumbala's anxiety-induced fluid retention. All 300 delegates stared at the 2 humans, who now stood in the center of the chamber, completely unaware of the cosmic protocol they'd just shattered. The male human Mack Steele apparently stood with his arms crossed over his chest. He was tall by council standards, nearly 2 meters of solid muscle wrapped in some kind of fitted black uniform, with no identifiable rank or designation. His face was angular, with a strong jaw covered in short facial bristles that looked disturbingly like defensive spines. A scar ran across his left cheek, evidence of past violence that he had, horrifyingly, survived. The female Penny Blackwood was slightly shorter but no less terrifying. Her long copper-colored head fibers were pulled back in what must have been a battle-ready configuration. She wore some sort of white laboratory coat over blue leg coverings, and she carried a small data device that she was casually tapping with alarming speed. Her face split open periodically to reveal a row of bright white cutting implements' teeth, Qrell'tix remembered from the preliminary briefing. "What's with all the staring?" Penny asked, her voice carrying across the chamber. "You guys act like you've never seen humans before." "They haven't, Pen," Mack replied with a sound that Qrell'tix's translator identified as a chuckle, apparently an expression of amusement rather than pre-attack warning. "That's kind of the point of why we're here." Qrell'tix watched in horror as several delegates from respiratory-dependent species began to hyperventilate. The Florasian representatives' petals were closing defensively, and the Miquat delegation had already pulled their ceremonial hoods over their eye stalks. "Deathworlders," whispered Ambassador Qrell'tix beside him, her voice quivering with terror. "Class 12 Deathworlders, if the preliminary reports are accurate." Qrell'tix's third heart began to palpitate as he recalled the briefing documents. Humans came from a planet so hostile that it would kill most council species within minutes. Crushing gravity, toxic oxygen levels, temperature extremes that fluctuated by dozens of degrees, and water actual corrosive dihydrogen monoxide falling from the sky at random intervals. And the humans themselves? The documents had been clinical, but seeing them in person was entirely different. Their eyes faced forward like all evolved predators. They moved with an unnerving efficiency, conserving energy like creatures accustomed to stalking prey. Most disturbing of all, they kept their skeletons on the inside, covered with a thin, vulnerable-looking outer membrane that provided no apparent protection. "They're going to eat us all," squeaked a junior delegate from the Vexillian hive, who promptly fainted into his nutrient bath. Penny rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, for goodness sake. If we wanted to eat any of you, we wouldn't have bothered announcing ourselves. Though I have to say, some of you do look like fancy seafood platters." She paused, then hastily added, "That was a joke." Nobody laughed. Mack stepped forward, causing a collective flinch among the closer delegates. "Look, we're here on official business. Earth recently intercepted communications about the Vyrex Collective, and we figured we should probably, introduce ourselves properly before they become everyone's problem." The Grand Chancellor's speech tendrils had retracted almost completely into his gelatinous form, a sign of extreme distress that Qrell'tix had never witnessed in his 40 cycles of diplomatic service. "You," Zumbala addressed Qrell'tix directly, his voice modulator pitching higher than normal. "You're from the integration department. Handle this." And just like that, Qrell'tix found himself designated as the official point of contact with the most terrifying species ever to walk into the council chambers. "Hello," he managed to squeak, rising on trembling limbs. "I am Ambassador Qrell'tix. On behalf of the Galactic Unity Council, I officially welcome you to the place you've already broken into." Penny beamed at him with that alarming tooth display again. "Nice to meet you. I'm Dr. Penny Blackwood, xenobiologist, and this is Commander Mack Steele, former Earth Defense Force. We brought snacks." Qrell'tix promptly fainted. When Qrell'tix regained consciousness, he found himself propped up against his delegation chair with something cold pressed against his forehead. He blinked his compound eyes back into focus and nearly fainted again when he realized Dr. Penny Blackwood was crouched beside him, her predator face uncomfortably close. "There he is. Welcome back to the land of the living, Ambassador," she said cheerfully. "You took quite a tumble there. I gave you a cold pack for the swelling. Don't worry, it's just frozen water in a bag." Water. Qrell'tix stammered, his voice embarrassingly high-pitched. "You put corrosive dihydrogen monoxide on my exoskeleton?" "Oh, please, it's sealed in plastic. Look, your carapace is fine." Penny rolled her eyes. "And humans are 70% water, by the way. We're basically talking water balloons with anxiety." Somewhere in the chamber, another delegate fainted. Qrell'tix managed to stand, his dignity somewhat restored by the fact that the council appeared to have maintained some semblance of order during his brief unconsciousness. Commander Steele was now standing before the central podium, addressing Grand Chancellor Zumbala directly. "As I was saying before your colleague took his power nap," Mack continued, "we've picked up transmissions from the Vyrex Collective. They're mobilizing for expansion into this sector. Our intelligence suggests they've already infiltrated several of your outer colonies." A murmur ran through the chamber. The Vyrex Collective was a known entity, a distant and aggressive species that occasionally raided border worlds. They were predators, though not particularly successful ones according to Council intelligence. "And what precisely does this have to do with your unauthorized entry into our sacred chambers?" Chancellor Zumbala had regained some of his composure, his speech tendrils now fully extended in a display of authority. "We're offering an alliance," Mack said bluntly. "The Vyrex are mobilizing on a scale you haven't seen before. They're coming for all of us." This statement was met with dismissive warbles and clicks from around the chamber. Qrell'tix noticed that even Qrell'tix was making the high-pitched keening sound that indicated derision in her species. The HFY representative, a towering insectoid with gleaming battle carapace, rose from his delegation. "We have monitored the Vyrex for centuries. They are barely a nuisance, contained to their small territory by our border patrols. What could your primitive species possibly contribute to our established defense protocols?" "Oh, I don't know," Penny interjected sarcastically, stepping forward to join Mack. "Maybe a perspective from another predator species? Fresh tactical analysis? Our adorable human ingenuity?" Chancellor Zumbala's central eye spot narrowed. "You claim to be capable warriors, yet your species has only just achieved rudimentary space travel. The Council has existed for 12,000 cycles. What could you possibly teach us about galactic defense?" Mack and Penny exchanged a look that Qrell'tix found deeply unsettling. "Perhaps a demonstration is in order," suggested Mack, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "Yes," Penny clapped her hands together. "Science time. Who wants to learn about humans?" Before anyone could object, Penny had pulled out her data device and projected a holographic image of human anatomy into the center of the chamber. Qrell'tix stared in horror at the detailed cross-section showing the human's internal structure. "So, quick biology lesson," Penny began, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. "Humans evolved on a high-gravity Deathworld with ridiculous atmospheric pressure and oxygen levels that would be toxic to most of you. Our bones, yes. Our internal support structures are made of calcium, the same stuff you make armor out of. Except we grow ours inside our bodies." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. "Our muscles," she continued, zooming in on the image, "can regenerate from damage. In fact, that's how we get stronger. We literally damage our muscles, and they heal back more powerful. We call it working out. Mack here does it for fun." "For fun?" squeaked a delegate from the gas-based Heliovorian Confederacy, their containment suits' indicator lights flashing in distress. "Oh, and here's a fun fact," Penny added, switching the display to show the human nervous system. "We feel pain constantly. Our entire outer covering is lined with pain receptors. But we've evolved to ignore most of it. Background pain is just Tuesday for us." The HFY representative clicked his mandibles dismissively. "Words and pictures prove nothing. If your species is truly as formidable as you claim." He didn't finish his sentence because Mack had already crossed the chamber in 3 swift strides. Without any apparent effort, He gripped the edge of the massive ceremonial stone table, a table carved from sacred Delvian granite that traditionally took a team of 12 Jarabi warriors to move during cleaning rituals, and lifted one end completely off the ground with a single arm. "This heavy enough for you?" Mack asked casually, not even breathing hard. The Jarabi representative's mandibles went slack. Most of the delegates had already retreated behind their chairs. Qrell'tix could only stare in petrified awe as the human held the massive table aloft with apparent ease. "Oh, and we haven't even told you about adrenaline yet," Penny called out cheerfully to the cowering delegates. "That's when we get really strong in emergency situations. What Mack's doing right now, that's just his normal Tuesday strength." Mack carefully lowered the table back to its original position. "I think they get the point, Pen." Chancellor Zumbala's gelatinous form had gone completely transparent, a sign of extreme stress in his species. "Perhaps," he said, his voice modulator wavering, "we should discuss this alliance proposal more thoroughly." Qrell'tix couldn't help but notice that all of the Council's previous condescension had evaporated faster than exposed liquid on a Martian afternoon, whatever that meant. He'd read it in the human briefing documents, and it had sounded appropriately hostile. As the Council chambers settled into an uneasy quiet following Mack's strength demonstration, Penny Blackwood reached into her lab coat pocket and pulled out a sleek metallic cylinder. "All this talking has made me thirsty," she announced to no one in particular. "Anyone mind if I have a quick pick-me-up?" Before anyone could respond, she twisted the top off the container, releasing a pungent aroma that immediately sent several delegates with enhanced olfactory systems reeling backward. The Threlbian ambassador actually extended his emergency breathing apparatus. "What is that smell?" demanded a horrified counselor from the Purothian delegation, their sensory frills flaring defensively. Penny looked genuinely confused. "It's just coffee. Standard Earth beverage." She tilted the container and took a long swig of the steaming black liquid. Qrell'tix watched in morbid fascination. Something about the substance triggered a memory from his xenobiology training. Pulling out his scanner, he discreetly analyzed the chemical composition of the vapor that had escaped the container. The results made his inner membranes constrict in terror. "By the sacred void!" He shrieked involuntarily. "She's consuming a Class 3 neurotoxin. It contains methylxanthine alkaloids. Caffeine." The word caffeine echoed through the chamber like a death sentence. The reaction was instantaneous and chaotic. The Galuvian delegation liquefied themselves in panic, a defensive mechanism they hadn't needed to employ in 700 cycles. 3 different species hit their emergency evacuation buttons. Chancellor Zumbala's personal security detail formed a protective barrier around him, all brandishing decontamination fields. "Poison. She's drinking poison," wailed a counselor from the back row. Penny paused mid-sip, looking around with genuine bewilderment. She glanced at the tumult, then at her thermos, then back at the panicking aliens. "It's just coffee?" she repeated, then turned to Mack with a perplexed expression. "Are they serious right now?" Mack was struggling not to laugh. "I think they are, Pen. This substance would kill 97% of Council species within minutes." Qrell'tix explained, his voice still unnaturally high. "It causes neural stimulation, cardiovascular acceleration, and can induce hallucinations and seizures." "Oh, that," Penny waved dismissively, taking another deliberate sip. "Yeah, it's got caffeine. Helps us focus. This is actually pretty mild stuff, only about 200 milligrams per cup." Mild. Qrell'tix couldn't process what he was hearing. "Our medical databases classify 5 milligrams as a lethal dose for most sentient life forms." Mack leaned casually against the sacred podium, crossing his arms. "You should see what she drinks before important research deadlines." "What was that stuff called again, Pen?" "Death Wish?" "Triple shot supernova," Penny corrected. "Death Wish is my morning coffee. This She gestured with her thermos. "Is just my afternoon pick-me-up. Want some, Mack?" "Don't mind if I do." He accepted the thermos and took a generous gulp before handing it back. He could use a bit more sugar, but not bad. The council chambers had gone deathly quiet. Every delegate was staring at the two humans who had just casually consumed enough toxins to wipe out a small colony and were still standing there, completely unaffected. From his position at the central podium, Chancellor Zumbala cleared his throat, or whatever passed for a throat in his gelatinous anatomy. "Perhaps," he said slowly, his speech tendrils quivering slightly, "we have underestimated the resilience of your species. This alliance proposal may warrant further discussion after all." Several council members nodded in reluctant agreement. Qrell'tix noticed that the Jarabai representative, who had been so dismissive earlier, was now looking at the humans with something akin to respect in his compound eyes. The voluntary consumption of deadly neurotoxins apparently commanded a certain level of admiration among warrior species. "So," Penny said brightly, tucking her thermos back into her pocket, "about that Vyrex problem. Shall we continue?" Just as discussions were beginning to take a more productive turn, a piercing alarm blared throughout the council chambers. Red emergency lights pulsed along the walls, and holographic warning symbols materialized at every exit. "Security breach in sectors 7 through 12, announced the station's artificial intelligence in 17 different languages simultaneously. Vyrex biosignatures detected. This is not a drill." The reaction from the council was immediate and pathetic. Ambassador Qrell'tix dove under the delegation table. The Florasian representatives curled their petals into tight defensive balls. 3 different species began their species-specific death rituals. Chancellor Zumbala's form rippled with panic as he absorbed the security data flowing into his neural interface. "The outer defensive perimeter has been breached. The Vyrex have deployed scout units inside the station. All security forces report to defensive positions immediately." The Council's security forces, mostly Jarabai warriors with ceremonial weapons that hadn't seen actual combat in centuries, looked at each other nervously. Their captain, a hulking insectoid with impressively polished but utterly untested battle armor, stepped forward reluctantly. "Great Chancellor, our units are our ceremonial guards. We are not equipped for actual combat with Vyrex hunters. Perhaps we should initiate emergency evacuation protocols." Mack and Penny exchanged a look. "Well, that's convenient timing," Penny remarked dryly. "Almost like they followed us here." Mack sighed and reached into his boot, pulling out a compact but lethal-looking weapon. "Probably did. They've been tracking our ship for the past 3 jumps." "You knew?" squeaked Qrell'tix, who was trying to decide which piece of furniture would provide the best cover. "You led them here? To the sacred council chambers?" Penny shrugged. "We figured they'd show up eventually. Honestly, we're surprised it took them this long." "Consider it a practical demonstration of the Vyrex threat," Mack added, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency, "and our ability to deal with it. Station defenses at 42% capacity and falling," the AI announced. "Vyrex units approaching central chambers. Estimated time to breach, 3 minutes." Mack rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck, a sound that made several nearby delegates whimper. "Well, can't let them ruin these nice chambers." "Coming, Pen." "Pen?" "Right behind you." Penny pulled a similar weapon from an inside pocket of her lab coat, along with what appeared to be a small metallic sphere. "Just need to grab some data while we're at it." Never seen Vyrex up close before. And with that, the 2 humans simply walked toward the danger, as casual as if they were heading out for a pleasant stroll. Qrell'tix, driven by a mixture of professional duty, scientific curiosity, and what he would later recognize as temporary insanity, activated his personal recording device and followed at what he hoped was a safe distance. The station's central corridor outside the council chambers was in chaos. Emergency containment fields flickered unreliably. Smoke poured from damaged systems. And at the far end, advancing with predatory grace, were 5 Vyrex scouts. Qrell'tix had only seen images of the Vyrex in security briefings. The reality was far worse. They were nightmare creatures, reptilian quadrupeds with additional grasping limbs that ended in serrated claws. Their elongated heads housed multiple rows of needle-like teeth, and their scaled hides glistened with a natural toxin secretion that was lethal to most species. Each stood nearly 3 meters tall at the shoulder. The lead Vyrex let out a bone-chilling shriek when it spotted the humans. 5 of them. Not bad odds, Mack commented, raising his weapon. I've got the 2 on the left, Penny said cheerfully, as if selecting desserts from a menu. What happened next occurred so quickly that Qrell'tix's recording barely captured it. Mack fired 3 precise shots that struck the lead Vyrex in what must have been vital areas. The creature collapsed in a thrashing heap. Meanwhile, Penny had thrown her metallic sphere, which erupted into a blinding flash that disoriented 2 of the creatures. The remaining Vyrex charged, moving with terrifying speed despite their size. Mack didn't retreat, he ran toward them, sliding beneath the first creature's slashing claws and firing upward into its softer underbelly. Penny was laughing, as she dodged a spray of toxic fluid from one Vyrex and returned fire, her shots striking with surgical precision. Their nervous system is fascinating, she shouted to Mack. Triple redundancy in the neural pathways. Less analyzing, more shooting. Mack called back, though Qrell'tix detected actual amusement in his voice. The humans moved with impossible speed and coordination, as if they'd fought together countless times before. When one Vyrex cornered Penny, Mack shouted switch, and tossed his weapon to her while she simultaneously threw hers to him, each catching the other's weapon without looking and continuing to fire without missing a beat. One Vyrex lunged at Mack, its jaws wide enough to engulf his head. Instead of retreating, the human actually stepped toward the creature, jamming his arm sideways into its mouth to block the bite while shoving his weapon under its jaw and firing directly upward. The creature collapsed, and Mack withdrew his arm, which was now covered in smoking Vyrex blood. Ow. That stings a bit, he remarked casually, shaking the caustic fluid from his arm. It's literally dissolving your epidermis, Penny pointed out, firing 2 more shots that brought down the last Vyrex. We should probably clean that up soon. I've had worse. The corridor fell silent, except for the sizzling of Vyrex blood on metal surfaces and the distant wail of emergency systems. The entire encounter had lasted less than 2 minutes. Qrell'tix realized he had stopped breathing at some point and forced his respiratory system back into operation. Penny was already crouched beside one of the fallen creatures, taking samples and scanning it with her data device. A fascinating adaptive biology. Their cellular structure is almost metallic. Mack wiped his weapon clean and replaced it in his boot holster. All clear, he called over his shoulder to where Qrell'tix stood frozen. You can tell your council friends it's safe to come out now. Penny stood up, tucking her samples away. Should we head back? I'm starving after all that. Fighting always gives me an appetite. Same. Think they have anything edible in this place? Mack asked, casually stepping over a massive Vyrex corpse. Doubtful, given their reaction to coffee. We might have to break out the emergency rations. The 2 humans turned and walked back toward Qrell'tix, their clothing spattered with caustic alien blood, clear expressions as calm as if they'd just completed a minor household chore. Mack was inspecting a shallow wound on his arm with mild interest, while Penny was checking data on her device. Got some great biometric readings, she said happily. This will make an excellent appendix to our alliance proposal. Qrell'tix could only stare as the humans approached, his recording device still running. The implications were clear. The council had just witnessed, via his feed, 2 humans casually eliminate 5 Vyrex hunters creatures that entire Jarabi battle squadrons were trained to avoid at all costs. So, Mack said as they reached Qrell'tix, about that alliance. Ready to continue the discussion? When Mack and Penny re-entered the council chambers, the silence that greeted them was profound. Every delegate sat frozen, their eyes fixed on the large holographic display that had been showing Qrell'tix's live feed of the encounter. Penny still had smears of caustic Vyrex blood on her lab coat. Mack's arm was wrapped in what appeared to be a piece torn from his own uniform, stained with both alien and human blood. Sorry about the mess, Penny announced cheerfully. Don't worry, we've neutralized all the Vyrex in this sector. Your security systems should be back online in a few minutes. Not a single delegate spoke. Even the normally garrulous representatives from the Chitteran hive mind were completely still, their communal antennae drooping in what might have been awe or terror, possibly both. Chancellor Zoombala floated forward, his gelatinous form now a peculiar shade of greenish pink that Qrell'tix recognized as the biological marker for extreme emotional recalibration. Esteemed representatives of Earth, the Chancellor began, his speech tendrils extending to their fullest ceremonial length. The Council has reconsidered your proposal. Your demonstration of capabilities against the Vyrex threat has been most illuminating. Told you they were becoming a problem, Mack said casually, inspecting one of his cuts. Indeed, continued Zoombala, his voice modulator pitched to convey maximum respect. The Council acknowledges that our intelligence regarding the Vyrex collective may have been outdated, and our assessment of human combat capabilities was clearly insufficient. Penny snorted. That's diplomatic speak for we were completely wrong, right? Several delegates flinched at her directness, but no one contradicted her. The Galactic Unity Council hereby extends an immediate offer of strategic alliance with Earth, the Chancellor declared formally. We propose establishing joint defensive protocols, information sharing, and perhaps a cultural exchange program. Sounds reasonable, Mack nodded. Though we'll need a formal recognition of Earth's sovereign territory, including our colonial outposts in the Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani systems. Qrell'tix watched in astonishment as the Chancellor immediately agreed without the customary 17 committee reviews and the 43 procedural votes that such territorial recognitions typically required. Of course. We shall prepare the necessary documentation immediately. And to facilitate this historic alliance, we would like to appoint an official liaison. The Chancellor's central eye spot swiveled directly toward Qrell'tix. Ambassador Qrell'tix has demonstrated both knowledge of human affairs and remarkable courage in observing your recent conflict resolution. He would be an excellent choice, would he not? Every eye in the chamber turned to Qrell'tix, whose antennae drooped in resignation. He was being rewarded with what would undoubtedly be the most terrifying diplomatic posting in Council history. I would be honored, he managed to say, though his voice synthesizer couldn't quite mask his existential dread. Excellent, Penny beamed at him. You'll love Earth. Though you might want to wear some UV protection, our sun is a bit intense. And maybe some gravity compensators. And definitely avoid our oceans, they're full of creatures almost as dangerous as we are. Yes, Mack added helpfully, and you'll probably want to steer clear of most of our food. About 60% of it contains substances that would be classified as mild to moderate toxins for your species. And whatever you do, Penny continued, don't come during what we call allergy season. All sorts of plant reproductive material floating through the air. You'd probably dissolve. The council chamber had gone deathly quiet again, delegates exchanging horrified glances as the humans casually described their nightmare planet. Oh, and sports. Penny exclaimed suddenly. You should see our sports. There's this one called hockey, where humans voluntarily slam each other into walls while sliding on frozen water. For fun. And boxing, Mack added. That's where we punch each other in the head repeatedly until someone loses consciousness. To be fair, Penny interjected, most of our recreational activities aren't about violence. Some are just about endurance, Like marathons, that's where we run 42 kilometers without stopping, just because we can. A delegate from the energy-based Futurian consciousness actually dimmed in horror. The full alliance treaty will need some minor adjustments, Chancellor Zumbala said hurriedly, clearly trying to regain control of the proceedings. Perhaps we could offer exclusive trading rights in sectors 12 through 17? And priority access to Council technology archives? Sounds fair, Mack nodded, and we'd be happy to share some of our medical advancements. Our regeneration techniques might be adaptable to some Council species. Within the hour, the treaty was drawn up, containing more concessions than the Council had granted to any new species in its 12,000-cycle history. As the final authorizations were being processed, Qrell'tix found himself standing nervously beside his new human charges. "Don't worry so much," Penny told him, patting his exoskeleton with terrifying familiarity. "You'll be perfectly safe with us. Humans are actually very protective of their friends." Friends? Qrell'tix's translator struggled with the concept. "Sure," Mack said, his predator face forming what Qrell'tix now recognized as a smile. "Anyone who follows us into a Vyrex fight with nothing but a recording device has earned that title." Qrell'tix wasn't entirely sure if that was reassuring or the most terrifying thing he'd heard all day. 3 cycles later, Ambassador Qrell'tix stood in his personal quarters, supervising the packing of his diplomatic essentials for the journey to Earth. His exoskeleton had been freshly polished and treated with a special UV-resistant coating that the Council's xenobiologists assured him would offer moderate protection against Earth's murderously intense solar radiation. "Ambassador, your gravity compensation suit has been calibrated to Earth standard," his assistant informed him, presenting a bulky apparatus that looked more like a battle exoskeleton than diplomatic attire. "It should reduce the crushing weight of their atmosphere to merely uncomfortable levels." "Wonderful," Qrell'tix replied dryly. "I'm sure I'll blend right in with the locals." The past 3 cycles had been a whirlwind of preparation and anxiety. And yet, so. The Council had thrown resources at the human alliance with unprecedented enthusiasm, motivated by equal parts respect and terror. 17 emergency committees had been formed to study the humans. Qrell'tix had reviewed their findings and found himself oscillating between horror and fascination with each new report. Humans slept, voluntarily. Every day they became unconscious for hours, experiencing vivid hallucinations they called dreams, and considered this normal. They exposed their bodies to extreme heat in structures called saunas for relaxation. Many of them jumped from high places with fabric devices for enjoyment. They consumed fermented beverages specifically because they interfered with proper brain function. And yet, for all their terrifying qualities, Qrell'tix couldn't deny a growing curiosity. Commander Steele and Dr. Blackwood had departed immediately after the treaty signing, promising to prepare for his arrival. In their brief interaction, they had shown not just the frightening capabilities of apex predators, but also flashes of something else: humor, cooperation, loyalty. Qualities that the Council valued but rarely associated with warrior species. "Ambassador, there's a package for you," his assistant announced, interrupting his thoughts. It was delivered by the human diplomatic courier that arrived yesterday. Qrell'tix accepted the small container with all 4 hands, his natural caution battling with curiosity. Inside was a smaller sealed canister and a handwritten note, actual physical writing on processed plant material, a quaint human custom. The note read, "Dear Ambassador Qrell'tix, looking forward to your arrival next week. Thought you might appreciate having this on hand, but use it only in emergencies. 1 bean is enough to send most Council species into a panic. Imagine what a whole cup could do. Safe travels. Dr. Penny Blackwood." Inside the canister were small, dark brown objects that his scanner immediately identified as coffee beans, the same substance that had caused mass hysteria in the Council chambers. Qrell'tix found himself making a sound that his species rarely produced: laughter. The humans had given him a diplomatic weapon disguised as a gift. Brilliant and terrifying, just like them. As he sealed the canister and tucked it carefully into his diplomatic pouch, Qrell'tix realized he had come to a personal conclusion about humans. They were simultaneously the most frightening and most fascinating species the galaxy had ever encountered. Creatures who could casually consume poison, fight apex predators for fun, and yet take the time to send a thoughtful, if slightly threatening, gift to a nervous alien diplomat. His assistant looked at him with concern. "Ambassador, are you experiencing respiratory distress?" "No," Qrell'tix replied, his antennae quivering with what might have been amusement or resignation, perhaps both. "I'm just contemplating how the most routine diplomatic assignment of my career has led me to become the first council representative to a planet where the weather actively tries to kill you, and the inhabitants consider this normal." As the final preparations for his journey were completed, Ambassador Qrell'tix found himself strangely looking forward to his time on Earth. If all humans were anything like the two who had walked into the council chamber and turned galactic politics upside down in a single day, then life as their liaison would be many things terrifying, certainly, but never, ever boring.